It has started. Okay. So just to introduce myself, I'm Dr. Sukanya Saikia. I work as a climate action and stakeholder engagement specialist in the Tipperary Energy Agency. And as I said, today's workshop is organized under the project called Own Your CCAP. So the project is a EU life-funded project, and it aims to bring local and regional municipalities towards owning their climate action plan. We have collaborated. We are involved with a number of local authorities under this project anyway, but for the people who are not aware of this project, we have 11 partners in this project, and some of these partners are attending today's workshop. So welcome to the project consortium partners as well. And so just coming to AMCO. So AMCO is a strategic design and project management consultancy who works across climate, sustainability, health, arts, and culture. They are actively involved with local authorities, so some of you might be aware of them. And we have Joanna Mulkin, who is the associate director and an experienced sustainability consultant with a passion for sustainability communications. And we also have Dr. Simon O'Rafferty from AMCO, who is the director and a strategic service designer with a focus on sustainability, climate action, public service design, and policy innovation. So I will hand over the floor to Simon now to just carry forward. And I will just wanted to let you know that the workshop is designed to be interactive. So there will be polls and question and answers, but just for timekeeping purposes, it would be great if you could keep the questions towards the end. But if you have any, of course, if you have any questions, please pop it in the chat box and I will keep an eye on that. So yeah, thanks.
That's great. Thanks very much, Sukanya. And hello, everyone. It's good to see you all on a cold and frosty morning in Ireland, anyway. And so, for those that are joining outside of Ireland, I hope you're having a lovely morning wherever you are. As Sukanya sort of said, we've just been asked to help with this kind of webinar series, partially reflecting on our own work with local authorities and other public sector organisations and government departments around climate and climate action plans and how to bring them to implementation. There is a big focus in this webinar series around communications. So we are going to share a little bit about, just what some of the kind of the good principles are around communications and some of what works, some of what doesn't work maybe. And just, as I said, hopefully just kind of maybe ignite some interest and need, areas they might want to explore further, or it might be kind of confirming that the stuff that you're doing is actually on the right track, or it's, you're kind of already doing things that are kind of working, working well. And as Sukanya sort of said, we're doing two of these webinars. So the first one, even though we'll be asking questions and it's an opportunity to ask questions of us and Tipperary Energy Agency, it's the second workshop will be much more much more interactive and kind of group work and breakout groups and stuff like that. So today is a little bit of kind of sharing information, discussing some of the issues, asking questions of yourself. And then we're giving you homework to do over Christmas. And then when we come back in January, as I said, there'll be a much more like a kind of a workshop with breakout groups, and we'll be getting you to work together and sharing much more amongst yourselves. So I'm just gonna share. I have slides to kind of go through, and I'll try and break it up as much as possible for questions. So it's just and I've obviously joined by my colleague Joanna. And again, we wanted it to be informal because we sort of see we're kind of among colleagues here, we're kind of among friends, we're kind of among peers. And we always sort of feel we can learn as much from you as you can from us. So we just want to make sure that you feel it's a place to ask questions. We'll try to field questions as we go. We don't want to, we can kind of respond as we need. And Joanna will jump in, if needed, to keep me on track because I have a bad reputation for going off script, and so keep me on track. But also, if there's things that I'm saying that maybe need to be illustrated more, Joanna will be able to jump in. So as I said, we want to keep it fairly informal from that perspective. So just I suppose the first thing is, can people see my slides there? I'm just sharing my screen.
Yes,
Yeah.
we can.
So as I said, thanks, Sukanya, and it's been great having kind of chats with you over the last couple of months just about, the Own Your CCAP program and what it's doing, and it's so essential, but it's also the kind of the learning of within Ireland, but also with what's happening around Europe, and just having those kind of platforms to kind of share and learn from each other is so kind of critical, because we know no state, no agency, or no organization has all the answers, and everybody needs to be able to learn from each other. So it's just great to have that opportunity for the local authorities. So as I said, the kind of the theme that was kind of set, and I'm realizing actually my big screen is in front of me, and my face is going to change color as I kind of go. I just notice it will change as I go through the slides, just because I have the big screen in front of me. But so really, it's about local authorities and your kind of climate action plans. But it's thinking a lot of you have done the hard work of getting the action plans published, and they're kind of online, and they're available, but it's now moving to kind of implementation. And so really that's kind of what we want to be thinking about, and how does communications and engagement support that. So the kind of the flow of what we wanted from this morning, again, we won't stick to exact times. We'll kind of, we'll respond to your needs and your questions as much as we can, but we wanted to have a little bit of, obviously, introduce who we are, talk a little bit about climate communications. And as I was saying to Sakanya, we wanted to split this between communicating climate change and then communicating climate action, because they're obviously slightly different. And we're trying to cover a lot within that in a kind of a short period of time. So there are things that we might go through quite quickly and kind of almost even gloss over. But if you have questions, we can try and answer them today. But also, if there's something that you wanted a little bit more information on, we're happy to kind of get emails from you after or through Sakanya to provide more information. But also for you to know, January the 5th is 15th, isn't it? I have the date right. January the 15th, it'll be much more interactive, discursive workshop, and so there'll be opportunities for you to say, remember that thing you said on, in December, and kind of come back to it and stuff. So we want to talk about, communicating climate change, communicating climate action. We wanted to talk a little bit about audiences, in terms of kind of public audiences, but also I know some of you are very interested in your own colleagues and staff as being an audience in terms of how you kind of communicate. We'll then kind of come to just kind of share a couple of, only a small handful of resources, but we want to ask those on the call if they have other resources or tools or toolkits that they want to share, with the group. And then we'll then introduce what we're going to be doing. We'll close out by what we're going to be doing in January. So as Sakanya sort of said, MCO, we're a fairly small consultancy based in Dublin, but we have people all over Ireland. Joanna's joining from Sligo, but we're a multidisciplinary consultancy, and we work across climate, sustainability, arts and culture, and health sector. We work on everything from kind of policy, program design, program management, but also kind of communications design, stakeholder, and kind of community engagement. So our work is quite diverse from that kind of perspective. And when we say multidisciplinary, we have people from, with backgrounds and obviously in design, communications, but also geographers, social scientists, engineers, people with public health backgrounds, and so it's quite a kind of a diverse group of people. And we do work across all levels of the public sector. The majority of our work is with the public sector. So that means working with government departments, as I say, with state agencies, with local authorities. But we also do work with companies as well. And so our work is a lot of what we're going to be discussing today. Some of it is based on what's kind of broadly known as kind of good principles, but also trying to just reflect on our own work, the kind of the things that we're hearing and seeing from the organizations that we're working with. So, and I was saying to Sakanya and myself and Joanna was saying, this isn't a presentation that we've given loads of times. We're just really trying to share, haven't actually given the presentation at all before. So we really just wanted to try and just share some of our experiences. So again, we kind of think there's a lot of experience and expertise of the people on the call. So it's as much for you to feel you can kind of feedback and, just as I said, don't, I'm not saying don't take everything we say as kind of gospel, but it's really reflecting our own kind of our own work and what, as I said, what we're hearing from the organizations that we work with. That's just a picture of most of the team. So we're kind of, we're all, as I said, we're kind of based. Our office is in Dublin, but we're based all over the country, and with people with different educational backgrounds and professional backgrounds, which is kind of what's needed for something like climate change and climate action, particularly when it comes to engagement and communications. But I would sort of I need to kind of stress in some respects that we're not solely a communications agency. We're not a PR agency, or we're not a communications consultancy. But we work through communications. Communications is part of the work that we do, and we have a design team, we have communications specialists. But actually, our work spans everything from kind of working with kind of large stakeholder groups, doing national consultations and engagements around climate change and climate action. We also work directly with communities around, the delivery of community benefit funds from renewable energy projects. We work with agencies like SEAI, the Environmental Protection Agency, in terms of how to kind of communicate and engage around things like home retrofit and retrofit programs. We also have an experience of working with youth audiences and some very young youth audiences in terms of how we engage those kind of young people in climate change and climate action. So how to translate all the stuff that we're trying to do from working directly with policymakers, state agencies, right through to kids in school and youth programs. So our experiences, we've kind of worked with as I said, with local authorities. And what I mean by that is we work with local authority staff. So the teams who are involved in, say, delivery of active travel programs, or, some of the climate teams and with the CAROs, but also we engage with elected officials. And so sometimes we have to communicate what we're doing and the results of the projects that we're doing to elected officials. And so I suppose we have some experience of how do you communicate climate change, climate action, and what the public think about that to different audiences. And I think that's something that's going to come through, hopefully, this morning, that it isn't a one size fits all, or there isn't a cookie cutter approach. We have to really tailor the communications to suit these different types of audiences. And again, hopefully that will kind of come through the presentation this morning. So that's just a little bit about us. Probably more time spent on talking about MCO than necessary. But I just wanted to have get a little bit of a sense of who's in the room. So I have a kind of a quick poll. I'm going to drop a link into the chat just for you to let us know what city or what county or what organization you're representing. So I've just dropped a link into the chat there. If some of you are in a room together, because I know sometimes that happens where you might be all sitting in a room together looking at a screen, you also have a QR code. So if you're sitting with your colleagues, you can take a photo of the QR code and answer the form. Or if you're sitting on your own computer, just fill in the form on the chat there, just so we can kind of get a sense of where people are actually kind of coming from, and just to let us know who's in the room. Unfortunately, we don't have time for everybody to introduce themselves directly, but it would just be good for us to know where everyone's kind of coming from. So if you could just take a minute just to do that, and then I'll just so we can see some of the locations where people are at already. We have Wicklow. We've quite a few from Ireland. So Wicklow, the Tipperary, Clare, Dublin. We're kind of covering pretty much north, south, east, and west. I see Vienna is in there. I see Sweden. I hope that's not you, Joanna. I know you're in Sligo. So we have people from outside of Ireland. So again, that's just really. Again, it's just really useful for us to know. So we have people who are probably thinking about this they're maybe in an urban context, but there's also in a rural context. And as I said, there's going to be people, bringing maybe kind of questions and insights from outside of Ireland. So again, I just think thank you for that. And as I said, I see there's somebody from Poland, which is great. So we have a real mix in the room, and I just think that's important, and we need to make sure that we bring all those kind of experiences, I suppose, to bear as we kind of go through this morning. So really, and again, I probably don't need to tell you this in terms of local authorities, but as I said, we work with all levels of public sector, right through to working directly with communities. And I suppose the kind of the value or what we see is in terms of climate communications, obviously local authorities, like as a sector in Ireland, the work that you do reaches millions of people on a daily basis, in terms of the services that you deliver, the activities that you do as a local authority and what your role is. And that's quite a powerful position to be in, I suppose, more so than individual government departments, more so than businesses. And I just think that's important for us to start this discussion with, as local authorities. As I said, you reach millions of people, and it's as I said, it's a powerful position to be in. So what this kind of means as local authorities, how you communicate. What we sort of say, the stories that you share around, climate change and climate action, you really have the ability to help change kind of perspectives, or to educate and inform, to inspire people, and to shift behavior on a national scale. I know you individually might be thinking about your own local authority area and the area that you're working in, whether it's at a county level or at a city level, but actually collectively as a sector, you're working on a national scale. And so what that kind of I suppose what that kind of sort of indicates to us as kind of MCO is, we like think about the kind of climate action plans that you've been developing, and it's like, well, what really, and again, this is from our perspective, really, what is the purpose of a local authority climate action plan? What does the plan do now that you have the plan in place? What happens next? And again, this is just from MCO's kind of perspective, and we sort of see, well, we have we have international, obviously frameworks, we have national climate action plans, and then these local action plans. But really, ultimately, what they're trying to do is enable, as a plan and as a document, which is a big ask of a document, is to transition away from kind of carbon intensive energy transport, building infrastructure, food, and ways of living. So that's easy to say as a short statement, but really it's putting a lot of it's a big ask, I suppose, of local authorities. And so this is what we need to be, as we're kind of going through, being kind of clear. This is what the action plans are trying to achieve. How do we communicate that, and how do we actually enable that to happen? And from kind of MCO's perspective, in terms of the work that we do, what's kind of interesting is, there's very broad agreement. And again, this is a very broad brush. There's very broad agreement on climate change as a problem. But what we sort of see across the board is there's often less agreement on what actions to take. What do we actually do? Where do we start? Do we focus on the big hitter actions, or do we do a lot of small things? And in our work, we see a lot of kind of things that are become barriers to actually taking action. So we're very good at writing plans, but not very good at implementation and doing things. And there's things that we see, again, just some of the terms I have there, where we like, it's a collective action problem. So sometimes things don't happen because lots of people need to work together. And so that's a communications issue. How do you get people to kind of come to an agreement on how they're going to collaborate around climate action? And that can be within local authorities, or it can be local authorities working and partnering with other organizations. And so really, how do we use communications to overcome that kind of collective action problem, to make people understand why they need to do it, what they need to do, and how they kind of work together? There's another area that we see a lot, what we call the kind of the governance trap. So this is around where, we're for those who are outside of Ireland, we're in the midst of a general election campaign. And so sometimes we sort of see that elected officials will say, well, look, this is not an issue we're hearing on the doorstep, because it's not the kind of immediate upfront issue. And so politicians and the elected officials and policymakers don't respond to the issue, and it's a little bit of a trap. And so what we sort of say that's a communications and an engagement challenge. How do we have more visibility and better understanding around what the public actually want, and how do we make that how do we communicate that to government, and vice versa, where the public might think government is doing nothing or local authorities aren't doing very much. How do we use communications and engagement to let the public know all of the huge amounts of effort and work that that local authorities are doing? So really to kind of, I mean, it's not all about communications, but communications plays a huge role in kind of overcoming these barriers to implementation. And again, I suppose it's kind of the key thing that's important for us. And I suppose we have, we sort of see this particularly within climate action. And looking at a lot of your climate action plans, there are kind of a whole series of actions and initiatives that are really trying to kind of grapple with the problem of climate change. Some of them seem quite technical or seem quite procedural or kind of process kind of initiatives, but actually ultimately everything that you're doing within your climate action plan is trying to influence human and organizational behavior. And so how we frame the actions and how we describe what's being done is framed around some kind of understanding you have of human behavior, and what motivates people, what, why they want to do something, how they feel they can do something. And we just know across the board, quite often we have sort of maybe a poor or kind of an incorrect understanding around people's actually, what are their motivations and what are their values and why would they actually want to take climate action. And I think that's very important as part of, as we go through this. I think it's very important to be considering this, particularly around communications and engagement. What really motivates people. Uh, and why would they want to engage, and how do you communicate in ways that make sense to as wide an audience as possible? We also know that climate action is tricky. So, if it was easy, we wouldn't be where we're at with the COP process going on at the moment. For some of us, it feels like kind of Groundhog Day. It's just for the local authorities. This isn't something that's easy to do. You're kind of your teams are trying to grapple with a big challenge, and it's important to recognize that. And so some of the things that we see in our work is that quite often, climate, it's a tricky thing to communicate because it seems to be, we've always sort of said it seems to be diffuse, distant, and delayed. And what we mean by that is that it's diffuse in terms of it seems to be about everything, from how we build our homes and how we move around and our lifestyle and our food. And that can be very difficult to communicate, and it can be very difficult to communicate that complexity. We it used to always be an issue that it was quite distant, as in climate was happening elsewhere. What we used to 10 or 20 years ago when it was photos of polar bears and stuff like that, and that's not really the case anymore. But that was always quite difficult to communicate and help motivate people around climate because it seemed to be something that was happening elsewhere. And then this issue of delayed, as in it seemed to be this is going to be a thing happening in the future, and we know that's a communications challenge because humans aren't very good at engaging with the future and understanding it. But actually, we know we're in the situation now where we know that climate change and the impacts of climate change are visible and are happening in Ireland. But all of these factors, it's almost like climate is one of the uh, it's always been one of the most difficult or challenging kind of communications activities, and I think it's important to recognize that. And there's a whole other range of factors that we see in our work. That actually climate. You know, if we're talking about climate action, we very much we've always focused a lot on the individual, but actually we know that the social context or the context within which people are living has a significant influence on their ability to take climate action. And we know there are kind of the stuff from our insights from behavioral sciences and other areas that actually how we communicate doesn't always kind of align well with the kind of the perceptions of risk and stuff like that. So communications needs to think about that kind of the social context within which individuals are living. And then obviously there's other things with, and again we could talk about more about this in the workshop in January. But there's a lot of stuff around when we're talking about climate actions and what we're actually asking people to do as a response to climate change. There's a mixture of types of behaviors, and some of them are, they're not necessarily all active choices that people are making. Some of them are kind of habitual behaviors around energy use and different factors. So there's a whole load of, I suppose, ingredients of climate communications that make it quite difficult, but we need to just get a bit smarter with understanding what works and understand and what doesn't work. So kind of coming back to local authorities, and again, I know there's been I could say from from all of the public sector, all sides of the public sector, there's been a lot of discussion over the years about the critical role of local authorities. And I kind of explained that at the start, is in the work that you do, you kind of engage with and meet with millions of people on a daily basis, but actually local authorities maybe are a little bit under pressure because you don't have the level of resourcing and staff that you kind of need to do all the things that you could do. But actually, so it's important just to start to be a bit more focused on what are the areas of activity that local authorities are doing, and how do you build communications around that to maybe have a bigger impact than you would if you had twice as many staff or twice as much budget. And so there's obviously a lot of areas where, local authorities, you can kind of, in terms of how you leverage what you do to support kind of climate change and climate action. But there's obviously things that are within direct control of local authorities in terms of your buildings and your fleet and operations, in terms of how you're reducing kind of emissions and communicating that. But also the kind of the kind of the services and the infrastructure and the products and stuff that you procure, and actually the communications that happen around procurement and how that can influence and inform around climate. There's obviously issues around placemaking in terms of the role of local authorities in creating the places that people live within, and the choices that you make around kind of developments and transport, and how they become opportunities and spaces for communicating around climate action. The critical role of the local authorities, in terms of which is more around communications, is kind of showcasing. And so some of this is about showcasing what's working, but we know local authorities, and I hope things like decarbonizing zones, which I know have been a kind of a challenge for the last kind of couple of years. But local authorities have a role in showing what works, but also experimenting and trying to see, well, we don't know what works, so let's try and find out, and then kind of communicating that out to communities and organizations. Local authorities also have a very strong kind of partnering role. So this means around, obviously, partnering in terms of being a lead partner with other organizations and making climate action happen. But also local authorities have a role in terms of convening and linking up organizations and linking groups, such as working with the energy agencies and other organizations. And again, these are all areas of communications and engagement that you can kind of work with. And then there's obviously the direct engagement in terms of raising awareness, consultation, and involvement of communities and the wider public in terms of the climate work that you're doing, whether it's specific things like decarbonizing zones or more general engagement around consulting on climate action plans. And so I was kind of, speaking to the Department of Environment, the communications team in DEC, and just sort of saying, look, this is, some of the there's kind of national, climate communications frameworks that I know some of you have started to use and started to look at. There's been campaigns that have been rolled out, particularly over the last year or the last 2 years. But really, the kind of overarching kind of national strategy for kind of climate communications is kind of cuts across three areas of, enhancing kind of awareness and understanding of climate action, building support for climate actions, so actions that the local authorities are taking, making sure that there's either building support or reducing resistance for, or also empowering people and organizations and communities to take climate action. So at that high level kind of national communications strategy, local authorities across all of that, more more so than any other individual state agency, or more so than any individual um, public bodies. So I just think it's really important for us to be thinking about there's the role of the local authorities, and then how that feeds into climate communications and climate engagement. And I think this idea, and we'll be going to this in a bit more detail over the next while, but uh, these three areas of enhancing awareness, building support, and empowering people, I think they really are kind of a key part of climate communications for local authorities. So what I wanted to do, just while we're just there's another very quick a very quick poll question, and I'll drop the question link in the chat now. But going back to the question that MCO had at the start of what is the purpose of a local authority climate action plan, and thinking about these three areas of empowering people to take action, building support for action, and then enhancing awareness and understanding. I kind of just wanted to get a sense from the local authorities in the room, what would they rank as the most important of those three. So let me just drop in uh, just to be interested, just to sort of see what you think is. I know this is a bit of a false ranking, because they might all be as important as each other, but really, do you think the purpose of your plan and how to communicate is to enable action, to build support, or to raise awareness? And as I said, I'll just share my just to see if people start to answer that question, just to see what the mood of the room is. Okay, there's 10 responses in. So it's kind of interesting just to see. Yeah. So there's a lot of, okay. Yeah. Empowering people to take action is kind of in the lead. So as the questions kind of come in, again, this is very interesting, right? So and what I mean is very interesting is, and it's not to say that one of these is more important really than the other, but it's more about what do you as local authorities want these climate action plans to do, if I kind of reflected on that, you know, and I'm not disregarding the one that scored the lowest, because it's still really, really important. But and again, I'm making a very broad assumption here, but it seems like local authorities are probably saying, well, we need to raise awareness, but actually the level of awareness that's out there is actually quite high already. So even within organizations, and if we were having this conversation 10 years ago, we would have been sort of saying at the time, we need to make people aware what climate change is. Whereas I think the conversation that we're sort of seeing across the public sector is, we still need to raise awareness and make people aware, but actually the people are now asking, well, what do we do about that, and what are you asking us to do, and what changes are we supposed to make? So this idea that the local authority plan should be empowering people, again, I just think that's very and it's only a snapshot from the people in the room, but it's something for us to reflect on, obviously today, but when we meet again in January 15th, just thinking about the kind of the messaging, and how we're going to address that. So thanks, yeah, thanks for that. I just think that's quite an interesting snapshot. So it's not just all about telling people what it is; it's about telling people what they can do, and then supporting people in terms of what they can do around climate action. And I think it does become an important distinction when we get further down the line. So just to say, so as I sort of said, and I realize I'm already probably going off time, so I'm just just thinking about Joanna Secandi, just to make sure I don't go off for the next 2 hours, because I can't see anybody when I'm presenting, by the way. So I'm like, yeah. So just I could go off in a tangent and get excited about one particular slide for far too long, but one of the things we wanted to say, well, look, in terms of we see a very distinct difference between communicating climate change and communicating climate action. And again, some of this might be repeating things that you know already, but some of the things that we sort of see, you know, in terms of what's been working, and I'm not saying everything that MCO's been done. We haven't got everything right over the last sort of 15 years of doing this. We've had some things where we've done that haven't worked, and we've reflected on that. But these are broad kind of things that we've sort of seen. We know that people, when you communicate, they will act on issues that directly affect them, and this links into that kind of what I said about the governance trap. And if you ask somebody what's important to you, they'll talk about the thing that's most immediate, whether it's cost of living or homelessness, or and then, but that's not to disregard that they also are concerned about climate. I think that's quite important. So we know that kind of climate, people will act on issues that directly affect them. So what this kind of means from a communications point of view is that it's quite important to maybe start to integrate climate across different topics and different themes and different activities that the local authority is kind of working on, and it isn't always just about the climate team talking about climate. It's what is the links to other areas around health or transport or housing or these kind of other areas. And I think it's allowing people to connect climate to the things that actually directly affect them. And this is something that we've known for a very long time. And anybody who works in communications, giving people stats and data might seem kind of good, but actually people remember stories more so than they do statistics. So just giving the facts isn't enough in and of itself, and you need to make the content relatable and for the particular audience that you're kind of communicating to. And I think this becomes particularly important, as I said at the start, where we work with from policymakers, to state agencies, to businesses, to communities, and to young people. So it's about trying to make sure that the factual information that you're presenting is presented in a way that's relatable. And just as I say, just I like statistics, and I like charts, and I like data, but actually that in and of itself doesn't it isn't sufficient. So another thing is no one campaign achieves all your aims, and what we're sort of saying is this is an ongoing thing. So we were involved in some kind of national programs like the early piloting of the National Dialogue and Climate Action, where we've sort of seen, we thought like kind of one big national campaign would start to mobilize the whole country. And, I think really what we've realized is that that's not the case, and that needs to be lots of campaigns run at different levels. And it needs to be seen as a kind of a long-term and consistent approach. So it isn't that climate is the flavor of the month. We know it's here and it will be here with us for into the future. So when you're thinking about communications, it's just not putting all your eggs into one campaign and hoping that's going to solve and deliver on your climate action plan. As I said, this is kind of linked back to the second point, but the idea is that, communicating, if you can vary your communications by the audiences and just thinking about that, it really, really helps. And obviously, this is kind of marketing 101, but the idea of kind of segmenting your groups in terms of who we speaking to and what way are we communicating this and how is it going to be relevant to them. And we see that, across the board, successful campaigns is where they've kind of varied the messaging and varied the content depending on the audience that they're speaking to. And we know that, when you're particularly this is more to do with climate change, but, we know that what motivates people to take action is kind of different, and different types of behaviors have different barriers and motivators. So how you're communicating, connecting home retrofitting or, active travel to climate is the motivators and the barriers to actually say retrofitting your home or doing active travel are all quite different, and so you need to be able to think differently about how you communicate, and identify and show those kind of barriers, and then help to motivate people to take action. This last one is something that I'll repeat a couple of times throughout, and it's kind of, we know there's a recognition individuals can't do everything on their own. So it's about trying to show, and we've had this just debate in Ireland over the last number of years where, there has this been focus on individuals and there's been pushback, and it's saying, well, look, it's more about systems change rather than individual change. Whereas I think and I don't want to speak on behalf of all of EMCO, but I think our kind of view would be is that individual action is still important, and it's actually the actions of multiple people within a broader system that will make change happen. So part of this will be about how to kind of connect those individual actions to the broader system change in terms of how this is going to reduce national emissions, how it's going to help us achieve our targets. Trying to make those kind of connections is quite important. But again, I'll keep coming back to this because it's not about telling people that, individual action is everything. It's the be all and end all. So again, some of this is like, okay, these are kind of some of the principles, and we've sort of seen what works and what doesn't work around kind of communications, and we've all probably made mistakes in the past in terms of we've had assumptions around what the barriers and motivators are, and so communications hasn't necessarily worked. But we think about the kind of the stages of communication around your climate action plan. The first thing is really how to get those kind of conversations started, how to kind of get people in. And you need to start to think about how do you really kind of connect. And again, I'll be probably repeating some of these things a couple of times throughout, but how do you really kind of connect with people's values in terms of what they see as important, not what you see as important? How do you kind of connect to the things that people see that matter to them? More so than matters to a particular group within society or the local authority. This idea of how to start the conversation is by working through trusted messengers, and so there's lots of evidence over the years that it's not so much what's been said as in who says it, in terms of how people respond to messaging around climate. So it's always trying to think about the communications that you're doing at a local authority level, how you're working through trusted intermediaries such as Tipperary Energy Agency or other community groups and other organisations. Now, in Ireland, I think we sometimes do this instinctively, but it's not always across the board. But so it's not always a case of crafting your fine message and your fine campaign. It's making sure who's actually disseminating and who's sharing that information, and are they trusted by the audience. So at the start, again, I know none of the local authorities are really at the very beginning of all this, but I think it's always important at that start of when you're trying to build the conversation and the engagement is to try things. You have to, think not everything is going to work. You might run campaigns, you might run activities, you might do, disseminate communication material through different audiences, whether it's libraries or community organizations, but you need to see what's working. And this is something that we'll come back to in January in terms of trying to measure and sort of see what's actually having an impact, and always be challenging your own assumptions, or challenging your in instincts about what you think might work. So it isn't a case of just put communications out there and hope that's going to change. You need to be following through to see what's working and what's not working. And then once the conversation is kind of started, it's about trying to, I don't normally like using this phrase about the hearts and the minds, but it is like climate is a very, there's a very rational uh, uh, part to it in terms of the kind of the potential risks associated with climate and extreme climate events, but there's also a little bit of trying to mobilize people to feel that they can actually take action and to engage with others. But again, like, so the kind of thing, this thing about bringing climate change home is in it's not about something that's far away and it's distant. Showing kind of what the reality of climate change is in the specific context that you're in. So we sort of said some of the local authorities are, located in urban context or rural context or a mixture of both. And it's really just trying to make sure that you're tailoring the messaging to that, so people can kind of think that this is affecting their immediate environment. And again, this is something that I know a lot of you will do instinctively anyway, but we sometimes forget. We sometimes forget that we need to just make sure that things are grounded in people's daily lived experience. This idea of kind of frames and narratives. So this is a huge area, and you could do a whole series of workshop webinars. But in terms of how you're framing kind of climate action and the stories that you're building around why the local authority is doing this climate action plan and why we're doing, whether it's active travel or district heating systems or whatever it is just making sure that you're kind of framing these things in a way that makes sense to the communities that are going to be impacted, or that you want to engage within that. And again, I don't. This is number five is probably one that we could spend days or weeks kind of discussing, and hopefully we'll be able to look at this in a bit more detail in January. And then so then no, obviously this thing we said where facts are important and being accurate is important, and tackling misinformation is important, but actually how you present the information is critical. And we know this is just from general marketing and design 101. You could craft the most perfect message based on the best available evidence, And you can have all the supports available to back up whatever it is that you're asking people to do. But actually, if you're not really kind of designing and thinking about all the details of what you're communicating and how you're communicating, to things can fall down. And I know I'm probably saying this from, I'm thinking about our graphic design and visual design and videography team. This is kind of their, it's important to make sure you're thinking about the effectiveness of the imagery and what you're using to kind of communicate climate action. Um, obviously the second one is connected. It's always about being accurate, and so there's a obviously with the local authorities you have a climate action coordinators, and then you have communications teams, and it's making sure that you're kind of working in tandem, and that you're pulling in the, I suppose, the most credible and best available kind of data and evidence and insights. And we know that these change on an ongoing basis. So it's always been on top of the information that they're putting out. And, we've had this a couple of times where, for example, we've been communicating to public bodies around their kind of gap to targets. And I know Joanna's going to laugh at me now when I talk about this, where we've talked about kind of like their gaps to targets, and we're sort of saying, look, this is where you need to be by 2030. These are the activities that you're doing, and this is where your kind of gap is. But actually, even we're in a position where we're showing them retrospective data, and even if it's 2 years old, and we're saying this is where your emissions were 2 years ago, and what are you going to do now? That can be problematic, because people will know, like, what's the most up to date information, where are we at now, and then to make informed kind of decisions around that. So I think it's just trying to make sure that you're kind of constantly up to date with the best available science and evidence that's out there. And then there's this whole idea of being careful around communicating uncertainty. So this again is another thing that we could probably spend all day talking about. But there's been a couple of articles in the press recently around uh, the variability of climate projections, and how to communicate that things may be worse or maybe better than the baseline, and you just need to be very careful around, with certain audiences, around how you kind of communicate an uncertainty. And not some audiences will respond well to uncertainty and they get it, but particularly kind of uh, disengaged or difficult to reach groups, they need more certainty around the projections, whether it's climate or emission projections that you're kind of putting out there. Sorry, I'm kind of glossing over this quite quickly, but then the kind of third step then would be, if you've kind of got people, you've started the conversation, you've kind of got people on board. And I think probably as a country, we've kind of at sort of stage two, where, that kind of the conversations are happening. The public is seeing this. It's now an election issue. It's, people are seeing it, that it's important, and they're asking about it on the doorsteps and stuff like that. But actually, how do you then kind of turn any kind of concern or kind of any considerations around climate into action? And so there's kind of a couple of things that we think are really important. Um, it's kind of providing spaces for interaction so people can learn from each other, and that it isn't just about thinking about your communications. It isn't just about putting out newsletters, or it isn't just about. I mean, they're important. Sorry, I don't want to downplay them, but it's making sure that you're looking for opportunities for interaction between the audiences that you're communicating with, and yourselves, and each other. So again, this could be kind of like deliberative exercises, or it can be just about making sure that it could be as simple as kind of joining other events and activities, and that you're thinking about communications as much as being two-way or three-way, rather than just you sending out messages. Make climate action an issue of social belonging. So this is another big term, but actually it's trying, when I said about trying to connect to people's values, it's trying to make sure that anything around climate action is connected to people's local context, where they live, their community. It's the things that they see as most important. Obviously family, friends, kind of community. These are the things that actually motivate and enable people. So it isn't just about this is what the local authority is doing. It's about what's happening at a community level, what's happening at a local level. And again, I'm going to come to this in a second, because it links onto the next piece. But making sure that whatever you're suggesting around climate actions is that they're actually possible and that they're meaningful. So there's no point setting people up for failure by giving, suggesting that climate actions that need to be taken that you probably know are not possible. They might be the actions that are the most important and will lead to the largest levels of emission reduction. But if they're not things that people feel that they can do, it's just all got, you're setting your audience up for failure. Um, and I'm just going to pause just for a second. Joanna, are we okay for time? Again, because I can't see anybody. I'm like, are we okay for time just for
It's 5 to 12, Simon.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So I do need to speed up a little bit. So, and are there any just before I jump on to the next bit, are there any kind of questions kind of coming through that need to be addressed now or
No, Simon, there's no questions. Just a comment by Addie Megan from Tipperary County Council that what the public wants and what we need to do are not the same always. And
that's no, very much so. And yeah, it's trying to find the kind of the sweet spot where you can actually work together. And I think that's the important thing around kind of communications is part of it is trying to show what's possible. And I suppose that's even that point 10 there, local authorities, sometimes you have to be kind of honest with the public around, there's things that you can do, but there's also things that can't be done. And it's just making sure that those things are kind of clear to the public. So I'm actually just going to skip over the next slide, but I just wanted to just see when we move into the next bit around barriers to kind of effective climate communications. I just wanted to sort of see, I'm going to drop a form into the chat here. Just one second. Um, so just trying to get a sense of, I think what was said there around from the Tipperary local authority is that, it's trying to align interests or align needs or align motivations. But again, it just be interesting from the group on the call just to see what they see as the biggest barriers or challenges. And I don't want to just focus on the negative things, but I just think it'd be kind of important just to see um yeah, just what's of yeah, okay. So public interest. Okay. Now, unfortunately, this thing doesn't show me. I know people have probably typed in a few of the others, and I can try and share them at the end. But I just think this is kind of interesting. And the reason why I've kind of asked the question in this way is it's where you feel the effort needs to be leaned towards. If I can, I'm sure there's a better way of saying that, but it's really you're kind of you're the sense is it's outside of the local authority where the most effort needs to happen. And again, that's I'm probably making a wild assumption there, but again, it's kind of interesting. So there's obviously how to engage the public in your area, how to engage staff, and there's a little bit of yeah, again, it's just useful for us to know, particularly for the workshop in January, where you think the messaging needs to go. Is it about external comms as well as internal? I'm kind of surprised. I kind of thought that some of the challenge will be around the internal stuff, but again, that might be just that's just the people on the call. So that's very useful. And why I guess I said why we asked that is just as we kind of go through it is who are we communicating to and who are our audiences. I just think that was quite important. Um, so just I've done my classic thing where I've probably gone taken longer than I probably should, but I'm going to move to these next bits kind of as I said fairly quickly. But I need to say, as I said at the start, if there's things you have questions about, you'll have access to the slides, and you can kind of come back to us and by email. But also just we can discuss these things in more detail in January the 15th. So in terms of like climate action, right? So this is really you're really asking people to do things. So like communicating climate changes, you're trying to say, look, this is what's happening out there. This is what's happening in terms of changes to long term weather patterns, and this is what it's going to mean for our local area in terms of flooding and these kind of issues. climate action is quite different. You're asking people to do things. And again, I'm going to gloss over this a little bit. We could spend 2 hours just talking about this individual slide. But the kind of key things that we think are important to start to think about when you're talking about climate action is you can be trying to think about changing what people think, so their attitudes and how they feel about something. You're changing their minds, or you're trying to get them to change what they do. And those two things aren't always the same. So people can feel, I want to do something, but I can't afford to, retrofit my home, or I can't afford a solar panel, or I want to cycle, but actually I live 40 miles from where I work, and so it's just trying to think about what are you trying to do with your communications. Is it awareness and attitude change, or is it changing what people do? And then sometimes you can be thinking about individuals. Are you focused on individuals doing lots of individuals making small changes, or are you thinking about broader kind of social change? And again, they're not the same. You can do mass communications to change lots of individuals, but actually they might all feel that they're working separately. And so again, this is at a very high level, just to start to think about with your communications on your climate action plan. I mean, you could be doing all of these. You could be doing saying, well, look, we want to change attitudes and motivations, but we also want people to take specific actions. We want to focus on individuals as well as the kind of uh, collective and social change. And so that's broadly around kind of climate communications. And I think it's important, almost you could position where particular campaigns or communication activities kind of sit. And it's just being clear amongst yourselves. Look, we're focused on changing what people think about a particular issue, and we're focused on individuals, or we need to make sure that the specific actions are taken and people change what they do, and we're focused on individuals, or we're focused on and then that should then inform the kind of the communication strategy. So then specifically for kind of local authorities, there's a again, I feel sort of bad because like local authorities are kind of bombarded with to answer everything and do everything around kind of climate action and climate communications. But I suppose some of the things that are important when we're talking about climate action is, local authorities have a role in terms of kind of setting the public agenda, sort of they're kind of a trusted source of information. They're most directly connected to people's daily lives, more so than government departments or kind of state agencies. So really this idea of the local authority setting the public agenda, making people aware of why is this thing important? Why should we be doing this? Then there's the education and awareness side of things, which is like, well, what can people actually do about it? And local authorities being a trusted source of that type of information. The kind of the social norming. So this is again is a very broad area, but it's showing its local authorities have an ability or a role to show people what other people are doing. So showing what's happening at kind of community level, at parish level, at municipal district level, or a county level, and this idea that people knowing that it's not just me trying to do so, trying to take climate action. This is what's happening at a county level. This one tackling misinformation is, we wouldn't have had this in the slide probably before COVID maybe, but it's become more important, and there's really a kind of a strong role for local authorities in terms of maybe tackling misinformation. And it's not necessarily about targeting those that are disseminating misinformation, but making sure that you're backing up all your communications with credible evidence and credible data. And that if you're seen as a trusted resource, you can communicate the science in a way that other groups can't. And then particularly it's around this idea of trying to develop inspiring narratives of the future. So what are the benefits? Why are we doing this? What are the co-benefits of climate action? What does it mean for our county? What does it mean for our community? And the local authority can show that in ways that other groups can't, whether it's individual community groups or individual interest groups. So it's important to be thinking, yeah, this the idea of trying to show inspiring narratives. If we do all this stuff, what's it going to look like? What's our county going to look like? What's our community going to look like in the future? But then there's also just some kind of this from experiences in terms of what works, or what doesn't work, and some of the kind of the lessons is, what we said to say is try to avoid, generally, and try to avoid showing kind of climate action as either futuristic or weird or somehow extreme. And when I say extreme, I don't mean an extreme action, but it's climate action is only done by certain sections of the community. And actually what we need to be doing is showing climate action is everyday it's kind of normal. It's the stuff, it's the choices that we make on a day-to-day basis. It's in our homes, it's on our streets, it's in our communities, it's in our local businesses, and so it's trying to move away from flying cars and uh, uh, images of kind of futuristic buildings, and we need to move away from that. Make sure that it's seen to be it's every day. It's the stuff that we're doing on a day-to-day basis. Another part that we need to kind of get the local authorities kind of, and this is a really tricky balancing act, where we've relied on kind of scaring people, by only showing the kind of the bad and scary future in terms of particularly around kind of flooding incidences or extreme weather events or whatever. So we need to have that, and we can't shy away from the reality of climate change, but also we need to give people a sense of hope, because we know that if you just communicate the bad and scary, that's a demotivator, and people will disengage. So you need to kind of balance the kind of the reality with giving people a sense of hope, and that can be through showing what the local authority is doing, and that the communities know that the local authority is there, has whether it's emergency response to extreme weather events or decarbonising zones or whatever it is, that people know that the things are being done. Obviously, this is kind of well understood. We can't be making people feel guilty about, if they're not able to take climate action, that somehow they're a bad person and they're not contributing well to the. And this has happened a lot, particularly in activist groups or campaign groups, where people have been made feel, oh, I have to, I've had to drive because I live in a rural area, whatever it is. We need to get away from that, but it's just like those that can do things, if you can do them, that they feel proud for having been able to do it, and that people can feel empowered. So with the actions that they do take, that they feel that actually I am contributing, I am making an effort to help in the county reduce its emissions. Now there's two here, right? So that are kind of quite linked. So um, you know people, this is where there was a lot of pushback over the last couple of years, where there was really a focus on it, just only individual actions, and that it's only individuals that do everything. And so a lot of the pushback was like, well, what are businesses doing, what are governments doing, what are and this idea of just focusing on the individual, and it kind of pushed the national conversation almost the opposite way, where people were saying that pushback around individual action became, pretty much the same as climate denial, to sort of say, well, look, I'm not going to do anything until government changes, or I'm not going to do anything until business changes or whatever. So we need to be able to say, well, look, individuals do have a role, and they need to feel empowered that actually actions that they do take contribute to kind of county or city level, goals, or counter national goals. And so that actually, if you're doing something, you're one individual, but there's actually loads of people like you doing the same thing, and you're contributing to. And I think that's, again, this is a huge issue to kind of grapple with. It's a bit of a balancing act. And then it's this idea of, well, look, individuals can't do everything on their own, and so it's a man making like something that we used to say a couple of years ago, where you can kind of frame climate action where people are the problem. In terms of, you're not doing something, and it's problematic that you're not doing X, Y, and Z, whereas actually it's around trying to say, well, how is the local authority working to make this stuff easy and possible for people to do? What are the things that have been put in place to make, what's the infrastructure that's been put in place to make it easy for individuals to take action? And, it isn't about all individuals trying to overcome these big, significant, systemic barriers or systems changes. It's around, well, what are we putting in place to actually make this easy for you to do? And again, sort of similarly to the second point, but only just talking about the issues and the problems, which a lot of communications was just trying to make people aware. Look, this is a problem. This is where the flooding incidences are going to be. This is the amount of money we're going to need to spend on climate adaptation. These are the kind of the challenges around farming or whatever. It's just it's actually starting to show people positively how those around them are actually engaging in positive climate action, and just being kind of visible and clear about that. And I realize I'm now speaking faster, so because I'm trying to move through this more quickly. But kind of linked to that last point, and again, you'll have the slides, is just whatever climate actions you're communicating, you need to make sure that the things that are possible that people can actually do, and you need to make sure you're not asking people to do things where there's big infrastructural barriers in place. The local authority should be looking at trying to make things easy for people to do rather than giving out to them for not doing something. Can the local authority focus on, removing the kind of the barriers or the what we call the frictions, or can you simplify processes, whether it's applying for grants or whatever it is? And this is a role for the kind of the climate teams to be working with the rest of the local authority to make sure, if these are the things that we're asking, are other sections of the local authority kind of geared up to make sure that these things are easy for people to do. This thing about making it attractive for people, so this could be about emphasizing co-benefits around health, or kind of cozy homes, these kind of things, and just trying to show the local authority has a role to say, look, this is something it's attractive for people to do, making sure that it's social, so connecting to people's social norms, the social proof, showing other people within the community are doing it, and sharing stories of individual action, rather than just focusing on large scale emission reduction, or infrastructural investment, or it's trying to show, well, look, obviously it's important to show things like whether it's the rollout of a district heating system or the rollout of cycle lanes or whatever, but actually trying to connect to the individual stories, what that means for people is really important. And also kind of communicating in a timely fashion, so when people are most receptive. So some of this could be seasonal, so talking about kind of retrofitting and home heating in the middle of summer doesn't necessarily land as well as it does in winter. But also there's different life stages that people are at, and how you can communicate, and people's ability to take climate action depends on, so when things like, we know that if people, say, for example, are moving home or leaving university, or moving into retirement, they can make different choices at different times, and they can take action at different times, and you can build that into your communications and communication strategy. So again, I'll just move through these ones quite quickly, but I'm just kind of trying to reiterate it, just to show that it isn't always about trying to show futuristic visualizations of homes or what things might look like, or maps and stuff like that. It's just trying to show relatively normal homes, that the actions that people are taking, it's kind of a normal thing. It isn't something that's only done by environmentalists, or it isn't only done by middle class people, or it's just trying to show that this is just a normal part of uh, climate action. It's just a normal part of day-to-day life. This idea of trying to overcome that kind of the inaction that's driven by the kind of the fear, and the kind of the complexity, the fear of the unknown, or trying to scare people into taking action, just to make sure that communications is kind of inspiring, solution focused, and if possible fun, so that you're actually showing people there's things that you can do, and this is just about people, even if it's low hanging fruit in terms of actions that people take, that it's like just making sure that you're being kind of hopeful and inspiring, and not making things, presented too difficultly. I need to reiterate. So we're sort of saying, don't scare people, but actually you need to show the reality as well. So this is a fine kind of balancing act. But anything that's shown around, any kind of communications around climate adaptation, it just needs to be relevant to the context that you're in. So there's no point showing, the whatever, the melting ice caps or whatever. It's trying to make sure that the communications is built around the specific context that you're in. So if you're in a particular local authority, and you have, if you're showing particular types of housing, or particular types of streets, or particular types of transport, make sure that it's actually relevant to that specific area. This idea of trying to be collaborative. So we're trying to sort of always sort of say, well, look, and I've said it a few times already, where it's like one-to-one. Uh, you're just communicating out messages, whereas actually trying to bring people together to have conversations, to have discursive activities, showing kind of examples in the real world of kind of climate actions that people have taken at a community level, can be more impactful than spending millions on a billboard campaign. And it's trying to look for the opportunities to say, how, you can sort of say, the local authority, these are the kind of climate messages that we want to get out there, but also to be asking who can get those out there for us, and trying to make sure that it's much more collaborative. And then kind of this idea of showing the bigger picture, that people are, this thing about the kind of the individual actions, but show how they are very much connected to this kind of broader systems change or kind of national targets and national kind of national challenges. And so people don't feel that they're any actions that they're taking, that they know that they're all kind of combining and contributing to a larger change. So I know I'm kind of sorry, I'm very conscious now. Joanna, can you let me know just where we're at time wise? Just
we've just come up to 12:15.
12:15. Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm gonna so Kanya, do you mind if I just go through? I'll go through the next slides just quite quickly, right? And we'll come back to these ones in January because this is getting into the specific audiences. But I just wanted to highlight a kind of a couple of things just about what do we know about public attitudes and the audiences that are out there. Is that okay if I'll go through
Sure.
these fairly quickly, and then, as I said, we'll come back to them. But one of the things that we at MCO have, we've always tried to base our activities and communications around all the evidence that we have available to us around kind of public attitudes, and what people are saying in terms of national surveys, attitudinal surveys, what they're saying to the CSO, the Central Statistics Office, what's coming out of the National Dialogue on Climate Action. So we always try to look at, well, what are people saying and what are they actually thinking uh, around climate change and climate action. And we know this changes on an ongoing basis. So we don't, we always have to be kind of keeping ourselves up to date in terms of what's coming through in terms of attitudinal surveys. But I think kind of, and again, I'm hoping most of you are kind of aware of this. Like one that's we've got quite excited about, and we're kind of we're trying to use a bit more is the EPA have been working with Yale on kind of this kind of large scale attitudinal surveys of the Irish population, and they talk about the climate and the Irish mind. But what's particular, there's a lot of very useful and very interesting data, and they actually they provide the raw data for the surveys that they've done, which can be quite useful. So if you wanted to, at a county level, break down and look into the information in more detail, it's quite it's particularly useful because you can start to ask questions of yourself around, are there things that we don't need to spend time communicating because people already get it, or are there things that we need to focus on to provide more awareness of? But they have done this kind of segmentation model where they've split the Irish population into four groups. Those that are kind of alarmed and are very concerned and probably climate anxiety. That they kind of get it. They want things to happen. There are those that are concerned that that they know it's an issue, but it's not the most kind of immediate thing on their day-to-day basis. But they'd be highly receptive to climate actions, and they'd be very supportive of governments making changes around regulations or grants and supports. There are those that are cautious, that they know it's a problem, but again, it's a little bit further down the line. They don't see that it's going to directly affect them. They've no visibility on extreme weather events or flooding or kind of coastal erosion and stuff like that, but they still see it as an important issue. And then there's a certain section of the society that are doubtful. So these are the climate deniers, or the people who just don't care, and that are just not interested, or just think it's a scam or whatever it is. But what's kind of interesting is when you break down. Sorry, that's chopped off there a little bit there at the top, but. When they've kind of broken down and sort of segmented the Irish population, that there's a kind of a greater proportion of people who kind of say that they're obviously either concerned or alarmed or cautious. And so even though it becomes, particularly on social media, becomes the doubtful groups kind of become, their voices are amplified. They're the ones who shout the loudest and shout the most and are probably quite active, but they're actually a small proportion of the whole population. And it's important to then sort of say, well, look, do we focus our communications on trying to convince the small number of those who are doubtful, do we try and convince them about this is something that's real and it's happening? Or do we focus on communicating to the alarmed and the concerned to say, look, these are changes that are happening at local authority level, and this is what we're doing, and this is how we can support you. Now, I've kind of glossed over that really, really quickly, but I just think it's an important thing for you to start to have a look at. But there are challenges, right? So we know that there's the segmentation of the population. there's people, a greater proportion of people are receptive. They're aware of the issue. They know something needs to happen, and they're receptive to things happening. But when you delve into the detail of the data, there are things that might need to be addressed. So obviously, there's kind of the people's attitudes and how they respond to climate really depends on the things that are most immediate to them at that particular time. So that could be seasonal, or whether there's issues to do with the kind of the cost of living, and sometimes they're framed in people's minds as being competing, whereas they're kind of not. But also, just it's when it gets into people's understanding of the actions they're taking and the kind of impact that might have in terms of emissions is that might need some work, because people might, they might think that certain actions that they're taking has a greater impact in terms of emission reduction than it does. But again, the door is kind of open to kind of communicating to those people and sort of showing them the actual impact of what they're doing and how certain other actions can have a have a higher impact. And then in terms of the staff, right? So this is, again, I'm glossing over this quite quickly, but the local authority, you've got like 20, almost 30,000 staff across, engineers, fire services, archaeologists, architects, technicians, senior management, trades, across a whole range of different areas. And actually, what we're sort of seeing is that we've worked with organizations on developing climate action plans, and that then we're now going into organizations to work with senior management teams and all staff in terms of actually how do they start to implement this stuff, and looking at trying to work with the staff to kind of come up with options and ideas for how this can be done. And I think one of the things that we've seen, and Joanna's going to laugh at me putting this slide in from SEI, but obviously when we're thinking about the public, we have to think about communications in a different way. But when we're looking internally into the organization and your colleagues and your staff, it's really important to focus on where the organization is at in terms of emissions, being realistic about where it needs to get to in terms of its emission reduction between now and 2030, now and 2050. But it's about working with the staff in a collaborative way to say, look, this is what the local authority needs to do. This is our statutory responsibility. And then working with them to say, well, look, the intelligence is in the room of the staff that are all there, and to work with them in a collaborative way to kind of come up with options and actions about how uh, they might tackle the problem, but to use the data that you have available to you to show, well, if we do this, this is how much it's actually reducing our emissions, and this is what it's contributing to what the local authority needs to do. So kind of use a little bit of data to show them the reality, work with them to say, well, what could we do about this? Get them involved, get them, inputting ideas about what can be done, and then using the data you have to show what the impact of, if they did that, what that would contribute. So there's visibility over if a team is installing, swapping out diesel for EV, or doing biofuel trials, or looking at kind of paper and printing or whatever it is, to be able to show them what the emissions impact reduction of that would be is quite a strong motivator. And that's something that we've seen over the last couple of months with the public bodies that we're working with. So I'm going to skip over these slides very, very quickly, but I'm kind of reiterating the stuff, when you're thinking about your audiences, and don't speak to everybody in general terms. Think about your audiences and whether particular campaigns or particular communication activities. Just as I said, it's about trying to be more targeted and more focused, and don't assume that everybody will respond the same way to kind of general messaging. This last one, again, I'm kind of reiterating stuff, but I think this is probably the most important. When you know the audience, it's really around kind of making a positive case for climate actions. This is what I said at the start around, the local authority kind of setting the public agenda. So it's making the case for it, but it's also, just acknowledge the risks. There's a reality of climate change. It's happening, but actually just be credible around the kind of options that you're giving people or the things that you're asking them to do. Created this sense of self-efficacy that people feel, I can take climate action. I know what it will do, and I know how it will contribute to kind of to emission reduction, as well as the co-benefits I would get from taking that climate action. So I'm sorry because
Simon,
I kind of
can I
glanced
just
off. Yeah, it's a kind of, I'm sorry.
No worries. Can I just interrupt? I
Please do.
know you have some resources, and then you'll get to the takeaways with the homework. But for the
Yeah,
people who has to leave at 12:30, I
yeah,
think it would be beneficial for them to know what the homework is. So if we could just let them know like what the homework would be for the
Yeah,
next workshop, and then we can come back to the resources. And for the people
yeah.
who can stay back, they can ask you questions. But yeah, just to first let the homework know, and I will get through some of the comments that have been coming in the chat box later.
Great.
But
No, that's
yeah.
great. Thanks, Sakanya. So we are meeting again, right? So we're meeting again January the 15th, and the idea would be this first session is really just kind of sharing kind of principles, practices, things to think about. There's a number of different options that you might want to think about, but it isn't about copying what's on these slides and trying to replicate it. You have to say, well, what's relevant for my local authority, where we're located, obviously the geographic location, but also thinking about, the resources that you have available, the type of local authority, some have, the types of budgets that you have available, the type of staff that you have available, the type of audiences that you're kind of communicating to. So what we want to do is send you away with a little bit of homework, which I'll come on to in a second. So when we meet in January, we can say, well, look, you've started to look at, well, what does this mean for my local authority? And we'll get you to then share that with each other. We'll do a more kind of it'll be more of a kind of a workshop format. We'll then look at, well, when you've started to identify the kind of communication needs for your own local authority, we'll go through how you might kind of create compelling messages for the particular audiences that you've identified. And this mightn't be everybody. You might say, look, in the first half of next year, we want to target a particular group or a particular type of activity. We'll work with you to help you see how you kind of craft those kind of compelling messages. We will then look at, well, what are the simple ways that you might start to measure impact of your communications, and what are the things that you might, simple ways of kind of tracking and following and maybe evaluating the impact of your communications, so you can then communicate that back into the local authority. And then we'll obviously then want to encourage as much as we can ongoing peer support and networking, because obviously not one local authority, not one organization has all of this right. Everybody's learning, we're testing, we're trying things, seeing what's working. So we would like you to go away at the end of January 15th with maybe working with Sukanya and the Tipperary Energy Agency, or kind of collaborating together, or some other, whatever other networks that you can kind of work through with, that you have a way of kind of sharing, even if it's as simple as, this is a communications campaign that worked well for us. How can you share that with the rest of the the local authorities and your kind of climate teams? So the homework that we want you to do is very, again, we'll email this through after, but it's just to do a very sort of a simple communications audit. So like, just to assess and look at objectively, what are the communication practices within your department, and like this is down to like, what kind of channels are you relying on? Are you focused only on social media, or are you doing print media? Are you doing video? Are you doing more deliberative activities? But just to be kind of clear about, this is how we're approaching kind of climate communications. Do a little bit of an audience analysis. So we were suggesting that maybe you choose one specific audience and break that out into segments, and then start to think about what you think their communications needs are. What are the things that might motivate this audience, and what are the things that might be engaging for them. So you're starting to think a little bit more about your audiences, and then this idea of a very kind of initial plan. What are you going to do in 2025? I was going to say 2026, but we're 2025 next year. And again, this isn't about anything. When I say communications plan, I'm talking about a couple of bullet points. So you might sort of say, come back to us in January, and you can sort of say, well, look, this is how we're currently doing communications. But actually, what we want to do next year is we want to reach, for example, like a youth audience, or other local authority staff, or local businesses, or the general public. You'll then think about, what's that audience, and are there different segments that we need to think about? Those that are engaged, those that are not, and then a couple of steps. Next year, we want to communicate this at this particular phase, at this particular. And again, I don't want to make it. I said homework, but I don't want it to be a full communications plan. But it just so means when we come back together in January, we can start to share with each other, this is what we're doing, and what works well in one local authority might work well with the other, and we'll get you to share kind of peer support, I suppose, to kind of support each other in terms of what you're going to roll out next year. But again, we will send this through in an email after today, so kind of
Yeah, thank
and
you.
yeah.
No worries. So just to reiterate Simon's point, this homework would enable you to just give some thought anyway to, it's a structure to just guide you to address your challenges that you are anyway facing internally. So it's not just the homework for this workshop, but it will be a homework for you to do anyway to address the challenges that you have been facing in your local authority. So we'll just go back to the resources, and at the end, I'll just go through the some of the comments that have come through, and the slides will be available, Suzanne.
Exactly.
So thanks.
So now, I intentionally, because we sort of said, so we've given a lot of information out. I've broken the rule 101 of communications. I've probably overloaded you with too much information, but we know that each local authority has different challenges. So we wanted to kind of give a broad reflection of, what we've seen, what works, and what doesn't work, and hopefully it might be the one or two things that kind of that might stick out with you. So we also wanted to share a couple of resources. Now I only have 4 on this slide, and that was intentional. So we have, when we send an email, we'll give you more resources, but they're obviously, as I said, there isn't a single off-the-shelf solution for every local authority. You're going to have to work out what's best for your individual local authority, where you're located, and the types of audiences. But there's loads of resources available out there, just whether it's toolkits in terms of how you develop communications kind of strategies or plans, how you might communicate the co-benefits, because sometimes this isn't as obvious to the climate team itself. And so some of the things that we'll drop in, there's lots of resources around, well, how do you communicate climate in the context of health? Or how do you communicate climate in the context of transport? And so we'll share some of the resources around that might help. And also there's just this thing about visuals. You don't always have really good high quality kind of photography to show kind of historical flooding events or other types of activities, and it's just, we'll share some resources around where to kind of get good visuals and maybe inspiration for types of photography or types of video you might use as part of your communications. So then I was only going to put a few just to kind of prompt, and then to ask of the people in the room. We might come back to this in January, because there's a lot of intelligence in the room. There's a lot of experience in the room, so that others might have resources. So what we'd like to do is just have a very simple shareable resource list, whether it's an Excel or kind of a Word document that other local authority, the climate teams, can add and kind of contribute. And this might be something, so kind of that you can kind of host, I suppose, as part of the Own Your CCAP. So but yeah, so that's all I wanted to say, is there's a lot of support and resources out there. We don't have all the answers. We've experienced of what's worked and what hasn't worked. But as I said, we just wanted to make sure that we can provide you with some, as I say, some kind of toolkits, resources, kind of prompts, places to go to get information that might help kind of communications activities. And I think I'll leave it at that now. Sorry, I'm over. I think I'll leave. And I'd like to stop sharing my screen so I can see everybody on the call, if that's okay.
Thank you, Simon. So Chris Dixon from Clare County Council just said that Canva has some very invaluable tool to develop engaging communication. So yeah.
So that's just sorry, just sorry,
Yeah,
so kind of just on that. I hadn't thought about Canva on the list of resources, so we'll make sure to add that. There's Canva, and there's other tools like that, and like myself and Joanna, sometimes we obviously have an in-house design team and videography, but quite often we have to provide a template to organizations that they can then develop further. And so things like Canva, and there are other tools. So yeah, so all I'll say is I'll add a couple of those tools like Canva to the list of resources. Yeah, just so again, this is about empowering the staff. Like and if you can get things out quickly, it's often, whereas I know within local authorities, if you're trying to get things done, it can take months just to get the design done. So actually, tools like Canva and other or creating charts or other kind of data stuff can be quite useful. So yeah, sorry.
No worries. I think Eddie just added to the previous comment that he made, is that from his conversations with people, they want to make a change but do not want to be associated with the green agenda, is what he commented. But then there is a very important point that was raised by Julie. She said that working with other areas in the local authority is a huge challenge. So it's a challenge within the local authority departments. So Cynthia also reiterated that comment, saying barriers exist within the LA departments. making it difficult for community groups that want to take action in their local area, but they cannot, because of the.
I totally agree, and like I think I don't know Julie, but I like this is, and it's not just local authorities. This is almost every organization. As I say, we're working with departments, state agencies. You know, the challenge is how to mobilize the organization. So this is, and I don't think it's. I'm going to speak openly here. So I don't think it's fair or right for the climate coordinator or that team to be the one that has to mobilize the whole organization. There's simple things. It needs to come from the top down. So there needs to be engagement from the senior management team all the way across to sort of set the conditions, to see this as something that needs to happen within the organization, to put some of the groundwork in place in terms of resources and that kind of stuff, and say this is something that has to happen for the local authority. But then the staff need to be brought together in a sort of kind of a deliberative or collaborative way to say what's actually possible. And I just don't think it's possible for, again, sorry, I don't want to be, I'm speaking open here amongst friends. Um, but like it's too much of an ask for like a climate coordinator, and a climate team to mobilize the whole organization. So it needs to be looked at in a more structured way. And as I said, the support needs to come from the top, and then the process needs to be put in place for bringing people together. And part of it, like, so as I said, some of the stuff that we're doing, where we've developed climate action plans for organizations, and then we've then gone in to work with the senior management teams, uh, to really sort of sit them down and work through the kind of what's needed, what are the commitments they need to put in place, what is the message they need to say to the organization, what resources need to be made available. And then we're going to all staff and working with, across sections, across divisions, across units. But that engagement with the staff, about half of it is this is what climate change is and this is what climate action is. The other half of it is what do you and what could you do and how would you do it, and we facilitate them to kind of come up with actions and options of activities that they could do, and some of them could be very small scale, but as long as they're implementable and feasible, and that they know that there's support at senior management and there might be resources made available for things, they feel more engaged, and you're kind of starting to mobilize the staff. So sorry, I'm kind of over explaining it, but I totally agree with what Julie said. It's not just for local authorities. It's every organization has the same. Everybody's busy, but it's trying to find that space, to show people what's needed, and then giving them the kind of bringing them together, and not telling them what to do, but working with them to say what's possible, and then looking at the resources that can be put in place to make it happen. So yeah, and again, I also agree with the community groups, because I'm part of a few local community groups that often have to engage with local authorities. So sorry.
Yeah. No, I think she again responded to your comment here, and she said that she agrees with the top-down approach, and unless the captain of the ship is steering in the right direction, then how can the crew and passengers get anywhere? So,
No,
yeah.
it's so important. And sorry, I should sort of say, like, some of this is kind of live, as in when I say live, as in we're kind of doing this on an ongoing basis. And I'd be like, even with style, like, Eve was even doing stuff yesterday. But it's like the thing about the senior management, it's part of it is it's so that they put the conditions in place, but also it's important for staff, down to kind of trades or operational staff, people around the ground, parks or whatever it is, to know that it isn't being forced on them, that everybody else is doing it. And actually, if you can get the senior management to do it first and to do the hard work first, they can say, look, we've kind of gone through this. They've had to figure out what's possible and what's needed, and I think that's an important messaging to the staff, that it isn't just, as I said, it's not something that's just been imposed. But the senior management have had to put the hard work in at the start as well, and they've had to reflect on what they're doing. I just think that's quite an important part of it. I did see a comment there about the Trello board, and just if anybody, Trello is, I'm probably not going to explain it properly, but it's just a way of kind of sharing resources. And I know, because we work at SEI, and they've started to use that for a few things. Obviously, the reduce your use campaign, where they're able to put up the assets and the resources and kind of links and templates and materials. But I know that they are starting to use it internally as well for the sustainable energy communities. So they have a Trello board kind of set up. So when somebody joins, community joins the SEC, they get a link to the Trello board, and it has all the information, links to previous events or webinars, but also kind of templates and resources and kind of case studies and stuff. And it is actually quite a useful, not the only tool, but we'll add this to the list of tools like Canva, just the things that might, that might be usable. It'd be lovely to see one for the whole of all the local authorities. so you have your own place that you can put information and share resources, and if you're doing a campaign, you can kind of share that, and everybody else knows what's happening in a particular local authority. But I'm not taking on that. I don't know who's going to take that on. Sorry. I just realized we've gone 10 minutes over. Are there any other?
No questions as such. There's a couple other links of, again, Energy Link and SCAI. So no questions as such.
There. Yeah, so no, I'm just sorry. I've just scrolled up the comments there, and I just want to see Eddie's kind of question. This is like, and like I probably repeated it a few times, as in trying to communicate to people's values. And I did have a slide which I kind of glossed over very quickly, and we'll come back to it in January, around the audience, around how you kind of communicate and connect to people's values is really important. And it's to recognize that not everybody necessarily, they might see it as a green agenda or something for the environmentalist, or this is something for the green teams, and it's a green team job within the organization to make this stuff happen. And we're trying to get away from that as much as possible. And this is what we're sort of saying. If you're kind of communicating around kind of the co-benefits, people can then start to see the things that they're interested in actually being connected to climate, and so they can feel that they can engage and they can contribute, and it's meaningful to them. Obviously the kind of co-benefits around kind of like health, or reducing traffic congestion, or whatever it is. There are things that people would be motivated by that are actually connected to climate, and it doesn't need to be come in as an environmental thing specifically. And a lot of the staff engagement and SMT engagement that we're doing, it's just framed around sustainability. So it's environmental, social, economic. So that's a huge. Sorry, these are all kind of, as I said, we could spend all day just talking about those individual questions, but I totally agree with Eddie. And this is one of the things that we're trying to, as I said, when 10, 15 years ago, we might have done it slightly differently, whereas now we're trying to make sure that we're not just focusing on one particular set of values or one particular set of interests or one agenda and stuff. So, okay.
Yeah, I think that is it. We do not have any other questions, and I personally found it very interesting, and I myself am very interested in how, because I'm a researcher by background, and how research could, but to the public, it doesn't mean anything, so to convert statistics into personal, messages that they could understand, and easy to understand content, it's very important and crucial for me personally.
Yeah.
And I found this session very useful, and I hope the local authorities found it useful as well. And they obviously have some homework to do and some food for thought, like they will definitely come back with, I'm hoping they would come back with more like things to discuss in our next session. And the slides will be shared amongst everybody. And there's a clap for you, Simon, there from John.
Okay.
So from everybody.
So no, I'm looking forward to January, because, as I said, we'll be more working together. I think we just wanted to kind of set it up and to be thinking about it between now and January the 15th, and then we'll be doing it like workshop format. So no, that's great.
Thank you so much, Simon. It was lovely collaborating with you, and obviously we'll collaborate again. But it was really good. Thank you, Joanna, as well. Okay.
That's great. Thanks, everyone.